Welcome to Adventures of a Blonde Geisha.
どんなに寂しい風が心吹き荒らしていてもあんなに誓った恋が終わりかけてたとしてもこんなに眩しい世界に生かされたまま
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adventures of a Blonde Geisha. My name is Lisa Wilkerson. Thank you for joining me. Now, before we get started on my J-pop culture, I want to say I'm so excited. I have an opening and ending theme song for my podcast. I was looking through all kinds of music tracks, that you can buy for your podcast to add some music to it. And I found this one called Sleepless in Shibuya. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect for me. Shibuya, for those of you that don't know, is kind of the youth culture capital of Tokyo. And it's where a lot of fashion gets started. It's where a lot of the music or the trends get started from Japanese pop culture. So I spent many a sleepless night in Shibuya, whether it was playing or working. I even lived in Shibuya for quite a few years. So Shibuya has always had a very special place in my heart. And at some point, during this podcast, I want to make sure that I highlight Shibuya and the amazing stuff that I came across. Because I started working in Shibuya like around the late 80s. So this is when the bubble economy was going strong in Japan. And this is also really the beginning of Shibuya becoming relevant to Tokyo and becoming the youth culture capital, really. And so I watched it as it grew and I got to experience some really fun, wacky, crazy, very Japanese, pop culture moments. So, they even have their own genre of music, which is called Shibuya-kei, which means of Shibuya. And this was really big in the 90s, especially, going into the early 2000s, and some incredible creativity has come out of Shibuya. So Sleepless in Shibuya. Yeah. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about J-pop culture. I have a hodgepodge of pop culture influences, of course, because I lived in Japan for so long. And then yet I, of course, related to a lot of stuff, that the Americans, as I say, or, people, as I am American, but, I, loved a lot of the pop music from the 80s from the US, or like the TV shows or movies or whatnot, or fashion. But there were a few things growing up that for me have just been huge influences in my life. So I thought I'd kind of talk a little bit about that, introduce it. I'll start with music. Pink Lady. If you haven't heard of them, it would be really fun for you to go check out their videos on YouTube, or they're also available on a lot of the music streaming sites. Pink Lady were the original idol group. They started off on an audition TV show, a little similar to American Idol, and they won. And it was two girls, Mi and Kay. They had their debut single, 1976, called Pepper Kebu. Peppa Kebu, Jama o shinaite. And it was kind of this really fun, cute, kawaii, or buriko, as they used to say back then. And you had a little bit of disco flavor going on, because of course, 70s, there's a lot of disco, worldwide that was really popular. But they continued to dominate the charts. So Peppa Kebu, and then they also had SOS, another big hit. Probably my favorite was UFO. And it was this really fun dance to that song, UFO. Southpaw. And, of course, they came out, they wore matchy-matchy outfits, and they always had a fun dance to every single song that they did. And so every little girl that I know of, maybe even families, would know the dance to the song, would know the lyrics to the song. They were that kind, they were like the Destiny's Child or the Britney Spears or NSYNC or whatever, Backstreet Boys of the 70s. They were that big. They dominated. So it wasn't just radio. They did TV too. They were everywhere. They had a little kids show that was hosted by the girls from Pink Lady. They even had like an anime that came out, about their life as Pink Lady. And then they decided they wanted to come over to the US and try to crack this market, which of course is a very difficult market to enter if you're an outsider, especially back then. They came out with a song called Kiss in the Dark, which somehow made it onto the Billboard Top 40 charts. And, for those of you that don't really know about a lot of the old school pop culture, Billboard Top 40 charts was everything. This was like the Bible of music, right? So that to them meant that they arrived and they were very happy with that. They even performed live at the Tropicana Hotel right around this time. And then they were given an opportunity to do a variety show on NBC. They did it with a U.S. comedian, Jeff Altman, who does a lot of stand-up comedy. He's done a lot of work with David Letterman's show. And the show was called Pink Lady and Jeff. Unfortunately, it only lasted 6 weeks. One, the girls from Pink Lady could speak English, but they weren't fluent, right? So there you go. You have that. But then also, they weren't allowed to do a lot of the songs that are really their brand on the show because they didn't have the rights to this song. So, I'm sure that they were extremely disappointed. Then they went back to Japan and they continued to, conquer not just Japan, but the rest of Asia too. They were all over the place. In 1980, they were actually the first Japanese act to ever perform live in Seoul, Korea. So that just goes to show what kind of a pioneer they were really, right? And I was obsessed with them. I had all their records, like the singles, and usually on the back side, there would be an instrumental. So I would take that and put on a concert for all my neighbors. I had a cute little pink record player with pink microphone. Oh yeah, I was Pink Lady all the way. But it's such fond memories. I used to love them. So if you ever get a chance though, you might want to check out, especially their videos. They're pretty fabulous. Now let's move on to some TV stuff that for me has been a really big influence, starting with Manga Nippon Mukashi Banashi, which Mukashi Banashi means folk tales from Japan. This was an animated show, came out weekly, I believe, every Sunday around 5 p.m. I would always be in front of the TV ready to watch the latest episode. And it was basically a little vignette of different folk tales, folklore from all over Japan, representing all different, districts or prefectures. And all the characters were voiced by two voice actors. I didn't know this until recently, but I found that pretty incredible because you have the narrator and then there are always, so many different characters in these fairy tales, but they were done by two veteran stage actors, Akira Emoto and Yoneko Matsukane. And one of the really cool things about this show, this 24-minute show, which once more, I didn't even realize it was 24 minutes. To me, it felt like it was an hour. I was just so obsessed with, I don't know, who knows, but one of the really cool things I think about the concept of the show is that every week they would have a different creative team do everything, as in the music, as in the illustrations, which is a really great idea because you are giving different creative teams opportunities to be a part of something very high profile, right? Like the ratings were great for Mukashi Banashi. In fact, I think to this day, it's one of Japan's longest running TV series ever in TV history. But this also helped nurture a lot of the talent for upcoming like Ghibli talent or Madhouse or all these animation studios. A lot of these people got their start with Mukashi Banashi. And one of the things that was really interesting about this TV show is that they would kind of teach the dark and the bright side of life. So this was about teaching moral lessons, I guess, to kids, but teaching the good and the bad. And, hey, happy endings don't always happen. which I think is as well is a very Japanese thing. I know that a lot of times in the U.S. with pop culture, especially when it comes to Hollywood, and especially back then, it was always a happy ending. They always had to have that happy ending, but Japanese pop culture doesn't have that so much. You see that a lot in anime. You see that a lot in the big films and the movies that they release. And so, yeah. So I highly recommend Mukashi Banashi. You can also find that on YouTube. I've recently started doing a panel for anime conventions that I go to where I talk a little bit about the Mukashi Banashi and they show a couple episodes. It's a lot of fun because it, takes me down memory lane. All right, moving on to anime. Yes. Now, probably my biggest influence for anime would have to be Attack Number One. This is a volleyball anime. Now, of course, if you know your anime, you know that there's an anime out called Haikyuu, right? Which has been out for a couple years now. But Attack Number One was the original Haikyuu. It started off as a manga. In 1970, it came out, and it was the first televised sports anime that was geared towards teenage girls, or as they call it, the shoujo genre. And it was originally released to capitalize on the popularity of volleyball because Japan's women's team had won the gold medal at the 1964 Olympics. So all of a sudden, everyone was really interested in volleyball. There were a lot of kids playing. And so they came out with Attack Number One. Which I didn't know until really recently. Now I have a really fun story about Attack Number One. I work with a lot of the Japanese seiyuu or voice actors, at different conventions, like all over the US. And I remember one time I was working with Masako Nozawa. She plays the voice of Goku in Dragon Ball Z, like a highly respected, voice actor. So she was at a convention and her daughter is, usually comes with her because she helps her, manages her. And, she helps out Masako-san with everything that she needs during an event. And we were just chatting about, different things. And Masako-san asked me, so Lisa, what are some of the things that you liked as a kid? And I told her I loved Attack Number One, and her daughter was like, oh my gosh, me too. And it was so funny because Masako-san was like, yeah, Attack Number One, cause I think every girl loved Attack Number One around that time when it came out. And she said, Lisa, I have a story to tell. She said, when I started doing voice acting, I would get these roles and I would come home and I would tell my young daughter, hey, I got this and this. And she just always seemed unimpressed, right? She was like, yeah, whatever, not exciting. But then one day she got an audition to play the part of high school captain Higaki, and she got the role. And she was so excited because she knew her daughter was a huge fan of Attack Number One. So she came home. She was like, oh my gosh, I got this role. And her daughter was like, what? And so, they decided that they were going to watch it when it came on TV and it was going to be this big deal. So the episode starts airing and then, Masako-san's like, oh, here I am. Her daughter looked at the TV and then looked at her really quickly and was like, what? You play the villain? And she said that all of a sudden her daughter was so mad at her. She wouldn't talk to her. She was like, oh my gosh, you caused so much damage. And it was so funny because Masako-san, she said it went from being this amazing experience where finally she was having a bonding experience with her daughter to now she's enemy number one, with her own daughter. So I thought that was kind of funny.